This is BIA, Becoming in Action, a space to explore the lifelong journey of growth as leaders, as professionals, and as human beings. Through honest conversations and lived experience, we evolve with courage and intention. Here's your host, Sandy Abear.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. There are moments in life when you realize that the most powerful voice you have is the one inside you, the one that whispers something isn't right long before there's proof, language, or permission to say it out loud. Today's conversation is about that voice. 4 years ago, my friend Laurie was living a full, busy life of a mom of 3. Nothing about her days looked extraordinary from the outside, but inside, she felt like growing unease. Her 7-year-old son, Grant, wasn't himself. He was struggling. Subtle changes that didn't add up. And while tests were run and therapies tried, Laurie couldn't shake the feeling that there was more than what was being named. What happens when a mother's intuition runs up against the limits of the medical system? What does it take to keep pushing when you're told to wait, to watch, to trust the process, when every cell in your body is telling you not to? This episode is not about fear. It's about advocacy. It's about the courage that shows up quietly but refuses to sit down. It's about a mom who took charge when it mattered most. Laurie's insistence led to an MRI that revealed there was something bigger going on. It led her across the country to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It led to surgery, a long road of healing, and decisions that ultimately protected her child. This conversation is about listening to your gut, even when it's uncomfortable, about finding your voice when the stakes are high, and about what it means to be the leader of your child's needs, even when you never asked for that role. I am so grateful Laurie is here to share her story today. And if you're a parent, a caregiver, or someone who has ever felt dismissed while advocating for yourself or someone you love, this episode is for you. Let's begin.
Let's go.
Laurie, can you take us back to that season of life? What did normal look like for you and your family before you noticed something was off with Grant?
Yeah, honestly, it looked probably quite similar to what other families with 3 young children are going through. Brian and I were both working full-time then and trying to get in as much family time as we could while also pursuing our careers. In 2014, Grant was born, and then in 2017, our second son, Ian, was born. 2019 came, and the youngest member of our family, Madeline, or as many know her as Birdie, was born, and life was very full. But in that super exhausted way that's hard to avoid during that season of life. Grant, in particular, was just a really easygoing, sensitive, loving child. And he moved from a love of Thomas the Train to cars to dinosaurs. He was just a really fun young boy that kind of took us through all of those cool stages. There was really not anything unusual. My pregnancy with him had been what I would consider textbook. The early years with Grant were textbook. So I always say early on, he hadn't really prepared me to parent other children because he was just kind of easy in that way.
That is just like my Grant. My oldest is Grant. Laurie's oldest is Grant.
Which is how we kind of connected, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then when did you start to notice that something different and going on? What signs did you see?
Yeah, it was many different things, but around the age of 5, Grant started a pretty typical thing, which was speech therapy for young children. So we realized he had articulation issues and started an out-of-school program to help him with that. I think at that time, then we kind of became accustomed as a family to managing these additional appointments. Ian was only 2. Birdie was a newborn. So they were constantly being hauled along for these sometimes twice weekly appointments. That wasn't necessarily where my real concern started, But when they did, we were at the start of the pandemic. So March of 2020, really right then and there. Grant had already showed some previous OCD type tendencies, normal things. I felt like kids, like germs and hand washing, which seemed pretty minimal and age appropriate at that time.
And then with the pandemic,
and that
everyone like reinforced it.
Exactly, because before, even at that stage of life in kindergarten, they're constantly wash your hands. So it didn't alarm me other than, his hands would get kind of raw. He would bring it up. He wouldn't necessarily want to share things if he thought that they were dirty. It kind of registered, but it didn't overly concern me. But he did seem to attach to certain ideas of things that would then carry on longer than maybe a phase would be. I noticed it was becoming a larger issue one night in particular. Brian and I had put the kids to bed, and I remember a show that we were into at that point in time was The Office. So just something light amidst all this uncertainty with COVID and having all of the kiddos at home. At this point in March, I went part-time, which obviously was good timing with the kids all of a sudden being home full-time. And as we were sitting down there watching this show, I could hear Grant's bedroom door constantly opening. I went up there to ask him what was going on. He said, I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. I'm like, you just went. There's no way you have to keep going. What started out as something that was maybe 5 or 6 times that night suddenly started spiraling to 10 times a night, to 15 times a night. And that number just kept going up. We were emotionally drained and frustrated because it didn't seem like anything we were saying to him mattered at that point in time. It didn't matter that he had just gone to the bathroom 7 times. He was determined that he needed to get up and go again and again and again. So lack of sleep and just overall uncertainty of why he would be doing such a thing became pretty concerning at that point. It was also still during COVID, and we were finding ourselves having to rearrange plans. So if we were going to visit family in Michigan, a lot of spots actually weren't open yet. So we were saying no to things simply because we knew he wouldn't be able to make it for the 45-minute drive up there. And at that point, I realized things had changed to a point where it was affecting everyone, and we needed to look into it more. This was, of course, when I reached out to his pediatrician, and we were able to get him in for an appointment. She checked and made sure, no infections, nothing that was overly concerning. Everything was checking out at that point, and she prescribed a medication. Unfortunately, that medication did not do anything. I went back to her, and she suggested a visit with a urologist. That is the next steps that we proceeded with. They did the normal, typical test and also prescribed a medication, to which we realized there was nothing that was actually wrong. When I did explain this to Grant, that there wasn't anything that was showing up, it was interesting because it did seem like he registered that and kind of moved on from it, which made me think, okay, this was something that he was holding on to and wasn't actually a concern.
That's so interesting that at that age he could process that and have that impact him.
Yeah, he was always very in tune and self-aware. I feel like he was always in his head a bit about things. Yeah, I was a bit surprised too, though, that he was able to process that. Yeah.
After everything checked out okay with the urologist, what was the next step?
Well, that was one of the larger things that, looking back, stood out to me that we had dealt with. However, there were multiple concerns that had really started to feel off for me. Grant was still struggling with choosing a dominant hand. He would eat left, then he would write right, throw left, and then go back to his right hand. I know that this can feel very age appropriate, but I could tell there was confusion there for him. He didn't seem to have a reason why he would go one way or the other. He also seemed to display different tics and had lost eye contact around the age of 5. So when I say he lost eye contact, it would be something like, Grant, let's take a picture, look at the camera. And he could just never quite hit the camera lens. He would always shift left or shift right. And I always kind of push with my kids to look people in the eyes. And he just really was struggling with that. And I could never remember him doing that before. And it's weird. I can look back at pictures now and almost pinpoint when that shift happened. But at that point in time, again, it's such a different age where things are changing with them constantly. And you start to question a little bit what was, or what are they becoming?
And you were in the eye of the storm.
Yes.
You had so much going on in your home. It's easy to let things fly under the radar with the easy kid.
Yeah, there were a lot of different things coming into play at that point in time. One of the areas that I do remember also standing out to myself and Brian is that Grant had started rec baseball. This was something we were excited about because Brian, that was his sport. He loved baseball. He couldn't wait to get his son in baseball. So, of course, we've got all the gear. I don't even know if we ever even asked Grant if that was something he wanted to do. I'm sure we came up like, hey, let's look at baseball. And being the easygoing kid that he is, I'm sure he went along with it. It was then that I think we started seeing things that were interesting to us. Brian was helping coach so he could see what was going on at practice, and he could also see what other kids Grant's age were capable of doing, which is something I hate doing as a parent because you never want to compare your kids to other kids. But sometimes it's inevitable that you're doing that. And with him being our oldest, we really didn't know what to expect. It seemed like Grant had lost coordination. He was a kid that hit milestones either early or on time. Walking was no issue for him. He talked on time. We got him a balance bike, and the day we took away that balance bike, he was off and going on his two-wheeler. Oh. So it was a bit of a surprise to us that he was struggling so much with catching and throwing. And when I say catching and throwing, I don't just mean the basic act of doing those skills. Example would be he would throw the ball, he would switch between his hands. So we were trying to get him to move toward one hand. And every time he threw the ball, it would land in a different spot. It was really rare that it ever made it into Brian's mitt. And they would work for a long period of time to try to build that skill for him. And every time he threw, it was like the first time he had ever thrown the ball. Catching was very similar. He would get his mitt up and that ball would be thrown. And it was like he couldn't connect in that last half a second to where that ball was going to go. That's when I started looking up things like crossing the midline and seeing that maybe that was an area where we were struggling, which would later lead me down different paths to try to correct this.
It's so impressive how you dig in and try to find answers. You never once were like, well, they're telling me everything's okay. I guess it's okay.
Yeah.
You kept advocating for him.
Yeah.
Which is hard.
Yeah. You would rather focus on other things, right?
Well, and you start to feel like that mom, that kind of crazy mom.
Oh, yeah.
Who won't let it go.
Right.
And everyone's there. It's fine. This is normal. And you knew.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that makes everyone feel better, right? Like no one wants to see someone else upset.
No.
So using those words is meant to kind of help pacify the situation. But yeah, no, it was certainly a time when I did feel like that mom. Yeah.
Once you noticed this lack of coordination that wasn't there before, what were the next steps?
It was really doing that distinguishing between the everyday stuff and then if this was going to be something deeper. What I noticed with Grant was that things didn't typically just go away one day, which now that I have my other children, I see how that can happen. But they didn't. With him, if they did go away eventually, it always felt like they were replaced with something new and scarier than before. Every time he would present with something new, I had this fear that this would be the thing we would be dealing with for the next few months. Him being the oldest, again, was just a challenge because I didn't know what I didn't know. And each kid, now that I even have more kids, they're all so different. I parent each one of them so differently. They have different needs and concerns and worries.
Yeah, parenting is so humbling because your experience with one child doesn't really help you out that much with the others.
Not at all, Sandy. Not at all. Yeah.
You've said you knew something was wrong. What did that knowing feel like in your body or mind?
It honestly was just constantly on my mind. I was persistently searching online. I can only imagine if ChatGPT and AI had been available back then. I'm sure in some weird form it was, but I was going down all the Google rabbit holes. I started sharing my concerns with anyone who would listen, really, family members, doctors, teachers, just to see if anyone had thoughts or ideas that I hadn't come across yet. And I just was coming up empty-handed. I was feeling like I was at a loss. And when I did get a suggestion on something from someone, I would run with it and see if there was anything of value in it that could help Grant. This was when we did a summer of going to the chiropractor, and then we spent about 6 months in occupational therapy. And while some improvements were made, I knew we hadn't figured out the root cause. So this was what was continuing to lead me. It was not a quick process to getting the MRI by any means. It was really one of the last things that we ended up with. And I think it's important to share that piece because that's really where the work was put in getting there.
Absolutely. I remember you struggling through this and talking through it, and you wanted anyone to recognize the pattern.
Yeah.
You were tapping into every resource you could to try to figure out what does this group of symptoms, presentation, because it's so subtle in so many ways. Like, oh, big deal, your kid's not the best baseball player. Right? Oh, he's switching between hands. It's like not red flag. Horrible, but it's off.
Yeah. And that was the struggle throughout the whole process, was trying to connect those dots for other people because I was questioning myself, and it made me feel a little bit just this overall confusion as to why I'm so concerned and no one else seems to be that concerned.
How did the doctors respond when you continued to advocate for more testing?
Well, it was really frustrating for Brian and I during that point in time because we had been taking the children, the little ones, with us to all of these appointments. I was feeling exhausted. I was really kind of getting to the end of my ability to deal with the situation, but I knew we weren't at the end yet. I would bring this to our doctor or doctors, depending on what specialty we were dealing with at that time. And I'm aware that there are a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through for the doctors to move to the next steps. So I was understanding of that. But at that point in time, we had done a lot of things that were even financially out of pocket to try to get the tests that we thought might be helpful or that we needed. And my goal really was at that point to get the MRI. I felt like that was where our answer was going to lie, but it's not a quick process to get there.
It's not.
No.
It sounds like there were moments where you were doubting yourself. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, pretty much all of the moments made me feel like I was being that mom. It didn't seem like people were understanding what I was explaining to them, or if we were talking about it, it felt like I was being ushered into a different conversation quickly. It's uncomfortable, right? If people don't really understand your situation. And I did feel like maybe I was even talking about it a lot. We had many conversations about it, and you were always just so willing to walk through it with me, even if that hadn't been your experience. But that's not everyone. And so I was kind of finding my place about where I could discuss this and where maybe I needed to play normal mom, that everything was going great, right? Because I think sometimes you're questioning what that means about you as a mom, too.
Well, as women, especially, we're verbal processors.
Right.
So we do need to talk through it.
Yes.
And when you continue to feel like you need to talk about it, it's a sign that it's not resolved and there's something there.
100%.
So I always recognized that you are such a level-headed mom. Like, you're not a uptight mom. You're very laid back with your kids. You have such a loving home. Brian and you are both such great parents. I never, ever seemed to me like you were trying to make something out of nothing or trying to make your identity about having a kid that has a problem in any way, shape, or form. But I understand what you mean. Luke with his type 1 diabetes, right? It's the same thing. I mean, it is so hard, but people don't realize it and they don't really want to hear about it.
Right.
And so you just kind of have to figure out, where can I talk about it and where do I have to pass? What I love about you is that you never silenced that feeling. You weren't like, I'm being stupid. You didn't shame yourself for it. You may have edited the areas where you were talking about it, but you never said, this isn't a big deal and I'm being silly. And that takes so much courage.
Thanks, Sandy. I think it's important that at that point in my life, I was meeting people who were really advocating for their children. And I met a friend of mine while I was doing workout classes at Orange Theory who is a wonderful mother. And she was detailing to me what she was doing for her son. I didn't know everything that was going on in the background, but I was listening. And she was the type of mom that never stopped advocating, never stopped pushing. If she needed an appointment, she called until she got in. I admired the way that she parented so much. I really feel like in speaking with her and her being vulnerable with me and sharing her story, it really changed the way I went about this process and medical journey with Grant. I would have had no idea at the time that it would influence me, but I always kept in the back of my mind, if she can do it, I can do it too.
People in our lives can be such a blessing that way. They come in right when you need to learn something from them.
That's exactly right. I do believe God puts the right people in your life at the right time. And that is something I've always felt, that she was put in my life to help me through this process.
That's so awesome. So through all of this, Laurie, what helped you keep trusting your instincts?
For me, instincts are really just a feeling. And usually whatever is gnawing at you and it gets resolved, that feeling goes away. And this feeling never went away. If anything, it was only building. It was on my heart. It was on my mind constantly. And I felt like I was beginning to run out of options, but that this feeling just continued to grow. So even though we had done all of these different therapies and I had looked into different ideas, I felt like it was only becoming a bigger issue. The critical moment really in this story is that Grant had presented with a new symptom. And that was when he was in second grade, so 2022. And he had mentioned to me that his arm was falling asleep. I asked him what that felt like, and it was happening at school. So I wasn't overly concerned. I had not seen this happen. Brian and I asked him, well, where is it happening? And he said his left arm, which is eventually became his dominant arm, and his writing arm. We, in our minds, thought, well, you're probably leaning on your desk and kind of hitting your funny bone. So that's probably what's causing this for you. I mean, I don't think any parent would be particularly alarmed to hear that their child's arm fell asleep.
Agreed.
But of course, in my mind, here we go.
It's the next thing.
Yeah. And that was after a few times that he mentioned it. And again, it really started off slow. About once a week, he would say, my arm fell asleep. And this went on for maybe 2 months. And then I noticed that it was progressing. And maybe now it was 2 to 3 times a month. At that time, we had a parent-teacher conference, and I did think to ask the teacher if he had ever mentioned it to her, because I thought if he's mentioning it at home, maybe he's mentioning it at school. And she said, yes, actually, he had. And he would walk up to her desk and say that his arm fell asleep. Her thought was similar to ours, was that it just had been leaning on the desk and bothered him. Oddly enough, I took reassurance from this because it's happening. He's getting up. She sees him. All is okay. But then it started progressing more. And now we're looking at 3 to 5 times a week. I start documenting it in my notes app.
Oh, I love that. You're like, I need data.
I need the data. I need to understand. And it gives you that feeling because we forget. Like my mind is always racing. Like, did it happen once last week? It's so having that data. And I would recommend that for anyone who is wondering if something is off. Write it down. Just keep notes on it. If you never go back to it again, amazing. But if you need to, it will be there for you. I started documenting it, and there was a night in February. All of these things are so clear, these certain specific moments with Grant. And I can, down to remembering what chair I was sitting at the dinner table when Grant told me that it was happening, that his arm had fallen asleep. And I was looking right at him. He was looking right back at me. He was talking. He looked fine. I said, well, what does it feel like? And he said, it's like my brain is telling my fork where to go, but I can't actually move it there. And that hit me, that is not normal. That's not typical of this situation. And finally, I could see it, and he could explain it to me in his words. At that point, we clean up dinner, and I immediately want to get down my rabbit hole, right, of trying to connect the dots with these different symptoms that Grant has been having. So I found the only quiet place I could, which was our basement stairs, and shut the door and probably turned off the light for all I know. And I just started putting in all the symptoms. And let me tell you, like, arm falling asleep, you would think.
But it wasn't really falling asleep. It was him thinking it's asleep because it's not listening, it's not responding.
Correct. And what I found out too, though, is there can be this pins and needle feeling.
Okay.
That popped back up in this list of what could it be, right? It was in there that this could potentially be a brain tumor, but Grant wasn't fitting all of the symptoms. I was taking some maybe relief in that, okay, this is a scary conclusion to what this could be, but we're not fitting a lot of these other main symptoms. So I was hopeful we were going to be going down a different path. I took my research to Brian, and He tried to help me put it in perspective. We had this healthy boy who was just about to turn 8 years old. He overall did seem fine, obviously, with all of the exceptions that I shared with you, right? But to anyone who would see him, he was a typical normal boy. In that moment, I immediately sat down and did a My Chart message to our pediatrician. And I laid out everything that we had been experiencing, all of the different therapies that we had tried, and this latest revelation of his arm falling asleep. She responded that he had his well check in a couple of weeks, and we would do a full neuro exam at that point and just make sure there wasn't anything that was standing out. So I settled in the fact that she was not seeming alarmed by the situation and that we would hopefully have some answers in a couple of weeks. Fast forward to a couple of weeks and we get to that appointment. And our pediatrician walks through, does the typical neuro checks and metrics, and he looks great. Everything seems fine. I wanted to move on, of course, and accept that, right? I wanted to accept that I was in my head about these things. If anything, she was thinking that he was presenting with ADHD symptoms or even autism spectrum symptoms. And honestly, I just wanted to best support him. So if this was the path, then I just wanted to do the proper testing and protocol and move on to the next steps. But the piece of it that wasn't sitting with me was the arm falling asleep. It just wasn't adding up. Due to the arm falling asleep feeling that Grant was having is how we finally were able to move to the next step. I had asked if we could get an MRI, and at that point, his pediatrician said it would be really hard for her to order it. We would have to move through neurology first. So I said, sure, no problem. Let's do what we need to do and find him a neurologist. So that day, I get the referral and I begin the process of trying to find a neurologist so that we can have Grant have his first visit. And I think my first call was to University of Michigan, and they said 6 months. Even though we were 2 years out of COVID, anyone who had to do anything medical during that time probably realizes how behind everything was. And I was alarmed that I wouldn't be able to get him in for 6 months. So I called Cincinnati, 6 months. I called Cleveland Clinic, 3 months. I finally landed on, it was my 4th or 5th call, University Hospitals in Cleveland. And she said, we have a cancellation tomorrow. I can get you in. Like, no brainer.
Yeah.
Pulling Grant out of school. We will go and meet with the neurologist. We get to the appointment. I actually had my mom go with me as well, because at this point I am feeling a little bit like I need someone else to hear what I'm saying and almost confirm that they see it too. Because you, in a way, almost feel a little bit like you're gaslighting yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And
that.
yeah. And so having that reassurance of someone else has seen this behavior, like a witness to what you're going through, really. Because Grant was still only 8 years old and could only explain things on such a level, right? So we meet with the neurologist, go through all the checks. He looks great. And I'm like, yeah, of course, I've heard this before, but we're not there yet. And he said, we can do an EEG and we will check for seizure activity. Again, it was his arm that was kind of able to keep pushing us along in the process because that was the one unexplained piece. So a week out, we get the EEG. It's a 15-minute process and it comes back clear. The doctor calls the next day. Yeah. So a mix of feelings, a mix of relief, right? Wanting it to be relief, but also so many things unanswered still, right?
Absolutely.
I had left a standing appointment with the neurologist just because I knew how hard it was going to be to get back into him. At that point, the EEG comes back clear. He says, let's meet after school because I think we're moving toward an ADHD diagnosis.
Okay.
So we can talk about what options you may have following this portion. So I kept that appointment. And interestingly enough, I told Grant that they didn't find anything and everything quieted down again for a little bit. Looking back, I wonder if Grant felt like we weren't listening to him or he couldn't keep bringing it up because we told him there was nothing wrong. But I was feeling like, okay, we're moving on from this. No idea what the next thing is going to be, but this particular thing we are able to move on from. Kept the appointment at the end of the school year, and he started talking about medication, if we wanted to do ADHD testing that we could do. And I think he could see that I was still feeling a bit unsettled. It's really hard. And a lot of 8-year-old boys are fidgety or active or not really wanting to move around. But it is the age where they start to identify that behavior as ADHD, I think, in children. Believe the doctor could see that it hadn't really settled with me, that being the solution. And he said, the last thing we can do is an MRI. Yeah, like, let's do the MRI. I've already hit my deductible.
Yes.
Get it. Right? Like with Luke.
Oh, ER's in March every year.
We're like, we're already there. So yeah, of course, let's do the MRI. And we found out that we could do this turbo MRI, which was only going to be 10 minutes of him having to go through that process. So I believe Brian took him the following week, and they kind of had a fun little day in Cleveland, or a couple of hours in Cleveland. And then just this little portion was him getting the MRI. And I felt like here's where we're finally going to conclude the story. Like, this will tell me that everything is okay and I can move forward. Within 12 hours, I had a phone call from his doctor, and I thought, gosh, 8 of those were sleeping. So I was initially like immediately thinking something was off. That morning, I had taken all the kids to the park. We're back in the house. The kids are running around screaming. It's time to make lunch, and I see the phone call come through. So I go out into our garage where it's a bit quiet, and another one of those moments where I can put myself back there standing on those garage steps. And that phone call comes through, and I answer it. The doctor says, "You're right. We found something." And then I blacked out. I think,
Like, sure. I mean, I'm so sure.
yeah, I think I blacked out a little bit because I can only catch like excerpts of what he was telling me. But the other piece that stuck with me was that he said it was not an emergency, and that was the good news, is that if it was an emergency, we would be immediately needing to come back to the hospital. And that would change everything, right? Because then you don't have the opportunity to make decisions and think about how you want to handle a situation. Oh, it's a big piece of it, of how we finally did find out that there was something more to it.
And as scary as it was there any relief in it to say now we know what's happening?
For sure. I mean, I never wanted it to be something like that. I think most people know enough about a brain tumor to know that it can be a devastating diagnosis. So that part was gut-wrenching, that was what it was coming back with. But then I immediately moved into, I believe in taking a moment to grieve your situation, to be sad in it. But I know I personally can't sit there for very long. And that was when we had to shift things and start moving toward acting as advocates for Grant.
And you did that beautifully, but how did you manage the overwhelm that you must have been feeling?
Really, that time, we had to wait another 2 weeks before we could get the more detailed MRI. That was part of the conversation with the doctor, was you would have to run it through insurance and get the approval. So those 2 weeks were brutal. We were still parents, though, to 3 children. So it really wasn't about me and how I felt during that time, because if it was, I probably would have crawled up in a ball and just waited until that appointment and chose not to do anything if I didn't have to. But I have always felt like there's comfort in information and education. So I figured out how to get that radiologist report right after I got off the phone with the doctor. I got onto the My Chart and started digging around to see if I could find more detailed information about what type of brain tumor this could be, because he did not specify. He said that they thought that it could be a benign tumor because there was this bubbly looking appearance that is similar to what they thought his tumor was going to be. But that unknown was incredibly scary. And I didn't even know the name of what this tumor was at that point in time. So I found that report. Obviously, I Googled it, and that was the scariest search of my life, was what was going to come up for what they thought this type of tumor was. And when I found it, it was saying that it was called a DNET tumor, which is a rare benign tumor of the brain. I wanted to feel some relief there, but how do you get that out? Like, what do you do? This is my sweet little 8-year-old boy that's sitting here and needs me to make these decisions for him. So I, of course, called. I think as a mom, I wanted to protect even Brian and our family from that information. So that's why I looked it up first, so that I could maybe give them some reassurance that it would be okay, right? We all want to feel like it's going to be okay. And I didn't want to put any additional fear in anyone else. And I wanted to hold that for myself if it was something that I needed to. So after we...
Wow, I just want to say, wow, you walked in that dark, scary place by yourself.
Yeah, that was not a good place. But I didn't... It's weird how you don't know how you're going to react in those moments. But yeah, I didn't want to see anyone hurt in this situation. So if I could in some way like relieve that for anyone, I wanted to be able to do that. Obviously, if I couldn't, then I would have had to share that news. But I was hopeful at that point that maybe I could deliver the news, but say, like, not the positives, but here's why it might be okay. Yeah.
Once you had that diagnosis, you started your advocating and moving forward. How did you decide the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was the right place?
Yeah, again, it wasn't something we just came to the moment we found out the diagnosis. I really thought we would end up at the University of Michigan because they have a wonderful children's hospital. I was familiar with the hospital. All of the babies were born there. It was close to home, and I really wanted to be able to have his treatment providers close to home. Our first consult really was with university hospitals where they found the tumor, and they were the ones that then had to do the more detailed tumor. And just a note on that is any parent who has a young child and has to put them under sedation, I had no idea. It was one of the scariest moments of our entire process. And I'm not sure you can ever fully be prepared for that moment of having to put them to sleep. And then they do even share with you with what's going on. We can't even guarantee that they're going to wake up the same way. It was one of those moments that in the process is important to note because it gets lost in it as that being one of the more stressful things that we had to do. And they have to sedate them so that they can stay under for anywhere from a half hour to 45 minutes to make sure that they can get the cleanest imaging. So we understood it. But I will say, moving forward in the MRIs that we've done going forward, we talked to Grant about doing it outside of sedation. A lot of places have the ability to watch a movie while they're having the imaging done. And that's been a huge relief in that process. So back to how we ended up with CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We had our consult with university hospitals, and they suggested immediate resection of the tumor, which would result in a craniotomy. I want to note, Sandy, I am not a medical professional, and I do not have a medical background. So I will use the simplest terms throughout this, so no one come for me. This is just our experience of how we went about things. They suggested the craniotomy and having it resected because the belief was very strong at that point that the tumor is what was causing the focal seizures. That's what we found out. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the tumor was on the right side of his brain, which was affecting the left side, which was his left arm. That's what was showing up. And a focal seizure is localized. So this was not the full body seizures that a lot of people experience, but in one particular part of his body. The unknown is that at any point in time, it could change to being a full body seizure. So that was the fear then, was if left in, it would eventually become worse because we had already started seeing that it had moved from once or twice a week to every day to multiple times a day. We had our first opinion from Cleveland, and then our next one was at U of M. During this process, it was also tough because I didn't know how much I wanted to share with Grant. Again, I really wanted to be able to tell him everything was going to be okay. And it was becoming more obvious that at some point he was going to need to be educated on what was going on. And he would sit in these appointments, and Grant, I mean, if you give him a screen, he is going to pretty much just check out. So that was our out during this process, to just move through the appointments without him asking too many questions. I will say that I told him that they had found something, and his response was, "See, Mom, I told you."
Ugh.
Yeah. And that hit hard. Validation I needed was the validation he needed. And so it was interesting. There wasn't this concern of, I can't believe you found something, and now what does it mean for me? It was that, see, I was telling you that there was something wrong. And I wanted him to know that I always believed in him. I just couldn't prove it. And now we could. And so that was a moment where I think our bond really did strengthen between each other. And he knew he could trust me. And I learned I needed to trust my children in a different way, right?
Laurie, I don't know how you could have done more, honestly. So as hard as that was to hear from him, hear from me that you were believing him. You never blew him off in any way, shape, or form. But you're right. You didn't have the data that you needed to get it to be moved forward, but you never quit.
I appreciate that. I do. So we went to U of M, and I really felt like this was where we were going to end up in my mind. And we had the appointment, and they bring in 3 or 4 different doctors because it's going to be a team that is going to be part of his long-term treatment. And I was so surprised because I thought it was going to align with what Cleveland had told us, which was, let's get it out And it was actually a completely different take. And they wanted to put him on anti-seizure meds for a number of years until he was a teenager. So at least 7 or 8 more years so that they could do the surgery while he was awake. And that threw me because I never wanted to think about him having to be awake during the surgery. Of course, if it was necessary, we would absolutely consider it, but it wasn't something that had actually occurred to me would be possible. And then the other piece of it was keeping him on seizure meds all of these years with no guarantees. I had also looked into the particular type of tumor that Grant had was called a DNET tumor, and you can look that up because it's not incredibly easy to pronounce, but it was showing that it didn't necessarily respond well long-term to medication. So I could put him on this medication, and we would probably always be having to either change meds or change dosing, and that felt a little bit scary to me. And I wanted to think about what all of our options could be. And of course, I want to do what's best for him at the end of the day. So our third opinion came from CHOP, and that was due to my brother-in-law, who is a radiologist out in California. We had run Grant's imaging through him. And just an important note too, to anyone who's maybe going through something similar, is to always get your imaging on a disc. So if you get an MRI or a PET scan and you're thinking you might even want a second opinion or you just want to hold on to it, I highly recommend asking them for the CD right then and there, because then it's a lot easier to go and get second and third opinions. You can just share your imaging easily. We had talked to my brother-in-law, and he worked with someone who had worked with what eventually became Grant's surgeon. His name is Dr. Storm, out of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And so based on that referral, we decided that we would at least go out there and make a visit. So within a couple of weeks, they were able to get Grant in pretty quickly. And we flew out there with Grant, met with the team, met specifically with Dr. Storm. He was so confident in the tumor that Grant had that they could resect this almost completely, or at least completely, because that's what's very important with the type of tumor that Grant has, so that you don't have anything grow back, is resecting this tumor in as much completeness as possible. So that was very important to us. This was something that he had done many, many, many times. I wanted to find a surgeon that wasn't trying to build their resume, that was overly confident almost that this was something that they could do in their sleep. That was him. That was going to be him. And I do remember him saying specifically to me, probably because Brian and I were asking many, many questions, that this tumor is not going to take your son's life. And that hit me in such a way, because when we go there, we are on the oncology floor. And there is not a more humbling experience than being on the floor with all of those sweet children that shouldn't be there, you know? And you think that could be your kid going through that. And so while what he said to me made me feel like this is maybe a little bit of an overreaction, should we be going through all of this process? It made me realize the reality of that situation, of the alternative of what we could be in. As bad as what we felt our situation was, it was just that perspective. And every time we go there, we get that perspective. And I'm sure Grant sees more than what he alludes to as well. And yeah, so that was really the start of how we ended up at CHOP for his surgery.
How quickly then did you schedule the surgery?
Yeah, so we scheduled it to be within a couple weeks after Grant started school, because we wanted him to get settled in. just have a little normalcy, because honestly, I didn't know if he'd go back to school. I had no idea really what a craniotomy looked like and how quickly he would recover from it. So I wanted to get him settled in, but we did realize in early August that it was going to need to be sooner than later, because now the focal seizures were happening many times a day. We felt like things were changing with the tumor and we would need to act faster. We ended up moving up his surgery by about 2 weeks. We drove out there because we didn't know 100% how long we would be out there. We needed to be out there a few extra days. They were also taking COVID protocols of testing you for it. So if Grant became sick on an airplane or on our way out there, we had real concerns that he wouldn't be able to have the surgery.
Absolutely.
So we actually even had to pull him out of school a week earlier. During that time leading up to this surgery was just such an emotional time of what was to come. And that's really where our family and our friends really stepped up and helped us. We're really there for Grant too, dropping off food or gifts or meals and just little things to help keep our mind off of it, and then taking out there with us like a little Lego set or a puzzle. And that really seemed to brighten. He felt like a celebrity. So yeah,
Bright spot.
it was a little bright spot, yeah, for our family, I think, to see that people cared for us. They were sending me text message that we were in their prayers, that their mom had put us in their prayer group, and just these moments of people we didn't even know were then out there praying for us too, just brought some peace for me. Yeah, that was kind of the lead up to the surgery at CHOP.
How did Grant handle the surgery and recovery?
The surgery piece of it that morning is incredibly nerve-wracking. He was the first surgery of the day, so I knew he was top of mind, that the surgeon was going to go in with fresh eyes and fresh hands, and that did make me feel better. But seeing your son's name up on the board to be called in and wheeled back was tough, because we knew he was going to come out on some level different. You can't go through that kind of trauma and never think about it again. So we knew things were going to be different, but really all we cared about was his health at that point. They wheel him back, and it's a multi-hour surgery, so you're going to be there the majority of the day. And they do send you text updates as to how things are proceeding. And one of the last updates was that he was then moving to the MRI. And one of the great things about CHOP was that they could do the surgery and then immediately put him through an MRI to see if they had gotten everything before they closed him back up. We get that notification, so we think we're going to see him pretty quickly after that. And the time kind of keeps going on. I realize the waiting room is not the best place to be when you're anxious and you're feeling scared. Everyone's going through that in that room, and there were probably 50 other people that are sitting there with a loved one in that back room. So Brian and I stepped out, and I had to take a step outside and get some fresh air and just try to move through the situation with some peace. When we finally did get the notification that Grant was out of surgery and we would be able to go up to his room, we had to sit in this waiting room off to the side, and it had a window, and we were waiting for a while for him. And I see this stretcher come out with Grant on it, and he is totally out of it. And I was thinking I was going to see him awake at that point, and I could see that his eye was bruised and that he was sitting there with his mouth slightly opened. Like, it looked like he was in pain, and that hurt, and his eyes closed. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, like everything that he's been through. So we meet him in the room, and it was taking him quite a while to wake up from the sedation. And initially we weren't concerned, but then I realized the nurses kept, like moving him along to wake up. And then you get that new feeling of like, okay, why isn't he waking up right away? We did eventually get there, but I will say that was a moment that we were just sitting in our nerves and waiting to see how he would be when he woke up, because they can't guarantee that everything is going to come back 100% the way they were working in a space where it can affect how you talk or your different facial muscles. So we were waiting to see the results of that. And then he woke up. He was groggy and cranky from the anesthesia, which is something you're not always prepared for, but he was awake. And that was a huge relief for us. It took time. Those first couple of nights in the hospital were rough because you are being constantly interrupted for vitals and checking to make sure everything's okay. But he was Grant. He was okay. And when I did take a moment to look at his scar, I do remember being blown away by how big it was, because I wasn't prepared for that. You really don't know. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is he going to think about all of this? And that was the smallest part of the whole thing. And now we barely even notice it. I do remember when he eventually went back to school, he was nervous about that piece of it. We had grown his hair a little bit longer, but you could still very much see it. All of his friends at school were so lovely and so wonderful about seeing it. I will say, when we came back home, Birdie was like, "Grant, you're Humpty Dumpty." Of course she did. It brought some levity to this situation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What surprised you most about the healing process?
I think the physical piece was pretty, I don't even want to use the word easy, but Grant was most concerned with getting back to his sports. He was most concerned with getting outside to play with his friends. That was really what he cared about. So I remember the way we got him back to school is he wanted to run in his last cross country race. He loves to run, and we missed the majority of the season because of him being out of school. And all he wanted to do was go to that last race. So I will say that was super emotional watching him cross that finish line that day, because I didn't imagine that that's how quickly we would be back to things physically, right? Emotionally, that's a tough one, because for everyone, maybe more emotionally for Brian and I, but he went on seizure medications. You need to be on those for at least a year after a surgery like that. And he was different. Grant was not himself. And we had a hard time because before the tumor, that was another piece that I had been experiencing with Grant, was that he had become withdrawn and not his normal friendly self and outgoing. And even at school, he had become much less social and just quiet, very quiet. I would ask him a question. He would give me a one-word answer. And it just was like he had withdrawn from me. And then he went on the seizure meds, and that was consistent. It did not change. He did seem more irritable. He was showing what looked like tics again that I thought could be related to the seizure meds, but of course, hard to know. And an emotional moment for us was we had the surgery done in September, and in December, we were getting ready for bed, and he said, "My arm fell asleep." And I remember just sheer panic of like, what does this mean? They didn't get it out. He's on seizure meds. Why is he having these breaks? Is he going to have this for the rest of his life? And I remember we did have to up his dose at that point. And it was really a year of moving through that, to the point where we thought we had some control over the situation. And then following the year, we worked really, really hard to try to get Grant off of those meds, because they were really affecting him. But there was certainly that fear that he may have a seizure again. So no one is going to tell you 100% that you can take them off of that medication. So we did it very slowly. We went through a weaning process, and we ultimately ended up with a 36-hour EEG again in the hospital in Cleveland to make sure that we could feel that he could safely come off of those meds. And I will say since then, it just feels like I have my Grant back. Like he's going through a little tween angst right now. And I'm so relieved for that, right? Like it feels so normal. And so that has been part of the journey, was that it was not get the surgery and everything was good. It was really almost as emotional as the years leading up to the surgery.
Yeah, you guys went through it for a long time.
Yes.
How did you and Brian support each other through all of this?
Brian and I are funny like that, where when one person needs one thing, the other person steps up into that situation. So I would think I'm typically the more emotional one, or the one who wants to talk about everything. But in the case where that would be Brian, then I would kind of step back and help us walk through and be the calm and rational, walk through the situation. And then vice versa. When I just needed him to give me a hug or tell me it's going to be okay, he stepped into that. I think what helped was we were always aligned, right? The goal was the same, and that was to protect Grant and to protect our family dynamic. And I think when you're aligned like that, you're an unstoppable team. And I'm not going to lie and say that we didn't have our moments through this process, that emotions are high and you're struggling personally. We certainly both probably were kind of grieving the situations in different ways, but we allowed ourselves to walk through that individually and together.
You guys are such a beautiful couple and so enjoyable to hang around. And
That's really kind.
very grateful to have you in our lives.
Same. We love you and Gerard so much.
What kind of support helped the most during that time and what didn't?
Yeah, it's actually the practical support that was just really nice. An ear to listen. Meals were super helpful. I don't always feel like you're an amazing cook. I wish I could just like pop in my kitchen and make meals all the time, but someone dropping off a meal just felt like such a relief. Sometimes the simple things were tough. People sending up their prayers for us. I feel like we could feel that and helped us walk through just that toughness of the situation at the time. Just emotional check-ins on people. How are you doing? Not pretending like something wasn't going on with us is actually something to think about too. If you know someone going through it, is maybe don't assume that they don't want to talk about it. Maybe they don't. That's fair, because there were times I didn't want to. But then I would just kind of move that conversation in a different direction. But it felt really good too when people were willing to basically just listen to me talk about it. That was helpful. I think things that maybe aren't as helpful is just sometimes things can feel dismissive, like, oh, it's going to be fine, or your situation could be worse. Like, that was never lost on us. We were acutely aware of sometimes feeling like we had hit the lottery in the type of tumor that Grant had, but also it was a tough situation.
Yeah, you won a lottery. You never wanted our ticket.
Yeah, I didn't buy that ticket.
No.
I didn't buy that ticket. See you.
No, you didn't. And no one would want to. And I think you mentioned it before. It's hard for people to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So they want you to be okay.
Yes.
Because it's uncomfortable to see you not okay. And we didn't have to hold space.
Yes.
For people to not be okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it sounds like you had tremendous support. And I think that's just such an indication of the person you are and that Brian is and how your family operates. But I'm sure even with all that support, there were times you felt alone.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, without a doubt, you always too feel like I didn't want to necessarily be a burden on other people. as well. That was always in the back of my mind. And I think everyone knows the saying, like, you can be in a room full of people and you still feel alone. And we're actually a pretty private family. This is actually the first time I'm publicly sharing Grant's story. I've always been willing to share it privately with people, but it's not in my nature to necessarily share anything that's going wrong in particular with me, with just anyone. That's something I keep with my close group of friends or my family. So this was one of those times that you could be at an event and everyone around you is having the time of their lives, and you're sitting with something that is very, very difficult, which I think a lot of people experience, right? Like, we don't know what, I think that's what really comes from this is I gained a huge sense of empathy for people and not knowing what anyone's going through at any point in time.
Absolutely. Looking back, what do you wish more parents understood about advocating for their kids?
Yeah, trust your gut. You know your child in ways no one else does. Being persistent is not overreacting. You're protecting them.
What would you say to a parent who feels something is wrong but keeps getting brushed off?
Keep pushing. Document your symptoms. Ask questions. Seek second or third opinions. You are your child's voice, or if you're a caregiver to even an adult, you are someone who's advocating for someone else. Find others that are seeking the same answers you're seeking. I can't stress enough that a lot of people are out there experiencing the same situation, and we live in an age where at this point in time, you can probably find someone who's been through it via the internet or a support group. And I think that that can be really powerful.
Absolutely. How has this experience shaped the way you define strength?
I think that strength is not being fearless. It's moving forward through that fear, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations and being okay with pushing the status quo.
And I think a really important last question would be, how has all of this changed your relationship with Grant?
Gosh, Grant is just such a great kid. I love him so much. We've always been so close, and I learned to trust him, and I think he learned that I'm listening.
That is so important. And to have that foundation, because
Yeah.
parenting is a long journey. It does not end when they're 18.
Yeah, we're like experiencing new things all of the time as parents, and I think we tend to focus on all the things we're doing wrong. And it's really hard to think that somewhere along that path, you're doing so many things right. And even if the outcome isn't what you thought it would be or what you aspired it to be, the effort's there, the emotion's there, you care.
You can cover up a lot of mistakes with love.
Yes.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. What are you most proud of yourself for in this story?
I think for not giving up when honestly I really wanted to. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people. There are things I take on and then I drop them and come back to them. And with this, even though my natural disposition is a people pleaser, I don't love confrontation, but it was something that I didn't question. I left my ego at the door. I was willing to ask whatever needed to be asked in order to find the answers I was seeking.
What do you hope listeners take away from hearing your family's experience?
That your voice matters. You matter. You can educate yourself. You can share what you know. You don't have to have a fancy title. You don't have to have a degree to be able to show up for your child or someone that you care about. I think through this process, I realized the most important title was that of mom or that of dad, and to trust that instinct that you know what's right for your child.
I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing your story. I know this is the first time you've put it all together in one sitting,
Yeah.
and reliving it is emotional. But I also think documenting it is really important too for yourself
Yes.
and for Grant. And certainly, I know there's going to be people out there that are going to listen to this and be impacted positively. So thank you so much for taking the time and the emotion to walk back through it, because I know it wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do.
Thanks, Sandy. I really do appreciate that. And I think it was the right time to be able to share it. I did ask Grant if he was okay with me sharing his story, and he was. And that was really what I was hoping for, is that maybe someone else can take something from this or just go with that feeling and pursue it. But thank you for your friendship through this and during that time too. I really have always appreciated that. So thank you, Sandy. You walked through this with me from the very beginning. So sharing this story, I know, is no surprise to you because we talked about it a lot. So thank you for thinking that this story matters
It does.
and that we can always have an impact.
Always.
Love a friend.
I love you, friend. Thank you. There's something about Laurie's story that lingers, not just because of what her family went through, but because of how she moved through it, the way she listened, the way she trusted herself, the way she kept going even when it would have been easier to step back and just wait. It's easy to second guess ourselves, to soften our instincts, to wonder if we're overreacting or asking for too much. But this conversation is such a clear reminder that sometimes that inner voice isn't anxiety. It's information, it's awareness, it's protection. And advocating for your child, for your health, for your life doesn't always look loud and forceful. Sometimes it looks like asking one more question, making one more call, holding your ground when no one else quite sees what you see yet. Laurie's story also reminds us that even when the outcome is good, the journey leaves a mark. There's strength that gets built, yes, but also tenderness, perspective, and a deeper connection to what really matters. So as you move through your day or week, you might want to ask yourself a few questions. Where in my life am I being invited to trust myself more? Is there something I've been dismissing that deserves a second look? What would it sound like to use my voice even when it feels uncomfortable? And where can I offer myself a little more compassion as I navigate the unknown? Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and for holding space for stories like this one. And that's what I'm learning right alongside you. See you next time.